In real teenage fashion, I've been putting it off as much as I can and trying to not think about it too much because it hurts to think about. But so that's why I'm here.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we have another live coaching episode that I'm really excited to share with you because I know it is going to be so relevant to so many students out there, whether they're juniors or younger. So, today, one of my consultants who works on my team, Brittney, had reached out to me a couple weeks ago. She is helping her cousin through this process. And of course, I encourage all of our consultants to help whoever they can and then reach out to me if there's something they need more assistance with. So Brittney reached out to me with some questions about the ACT that her cousin was having. And I was like, you know what? Let's just talk it out. So Brittney and her cousin were gracious enough to join me on the podcast to talk through soup to nuts, what's been going on, what's the goal, what are the challenges, and what are we going to do about it. So take a listen. So let's start with some background information. What year of high school are you in?
I'm a junior in high school.
Okay. And how's it going so far?
It's going good, a little stressful. Obviously, the pressure of having everything be somewhat well enough to be presented to a university is a little
Yeah.
bit much,
Yeah.
but it's good pressure.
Okay, great. And I mean, junior year is the hardest. So,
Right.
you're not alone in feeling that. But of course, this question of standardized testing makes junior year so much more complicated, right? Not only are you taking the hardest classes you've ever taken, probably more of them than you've had in your schedule before, you're also doing this thing outside of school that legitimately could be another class on its own, right? So give me some of the background on what you've done so far with the testing question, how you decided on the ACT, and where things stand right now.
Great. I have always been an anxious test taker. I really can't do too long of anything. And so, as soon as junior year started, a lot of my teachers were talking about all the things that we would have to complete towards the end of this year. And I came home the same day and I was like, Mom, I need a tutor. I don't think I can do it by myself. And so we went to this company close to my high school, and they offer to let you take two practice tests, one SAT and one ACT. And so I did just that. I did the SAT and I did not do good. And I did the ACT, but I did a little bit better on that one. Not sure why, but that's just what it was. And I went on a Zoom call with the CEO of the company, and he sort of goes through the whole thing and explains in many words why you are dumber. And so,
I'm sure that's not how you put it, but okay.
no, but nicer words, oh, Sophia, you don't know what a comma is, I suppose. So that was that. And he has a course of action. He allows you to either have a one on one session with a tutor or a group sort of whatever class. And so when it came down to it and he was giving the numbers to my mom, it was just too much for something that isn't, you aren't sure if it's going to work or if it's not. And he even said it himself. He was like, I can't guarantee that you're going to learn everything you need to get a 32 or a 36 on this ACT by a month from now or 2 months from now or whatever it is. So my mom was like, you have to figure out a way to try and do it yourself. But I've been prioritizing school because Brittney and I have been talking about that ourselves. So I've just been prioritizing my grades, and teenage fashion, I've been putting it off as much as I can and trying to not think about it too much because it hurts to think about. But so that's why I'm here.
Okay. Well, thank you for that very comprehensive overview. And Brittney, I'm glad you're able to join. Okay, so just picking up from where you left off, that's exactly where I would start is a practice test of each. Let's see what each one shows us. And let me tell you, I don't think any teenager in America knows how to use a comma. You're not the only one. Everybody, it's always those punctuation rules. They were like, wait, I thought a semicolon was for quotations or something ridiculous that it's absolutely not for. They just don't teach punctuation in school. So that's really common. but also an easy problem to fix. So I hear you that tutoring can be really expensive. I also hear you that it's something you're just like, should I invest time in this? Because I might not end up using this score. So let's actually start there, if we can, with some of the colleges that you're thinking about and what kind of score policies they have and what kind of score averages they have. So just throw out a few colleges that you're kind of targeting right now.
My dream school as of right now is the University of Michigan, and they're a very competitive school. And so they require you to have higher scores. But what Brittany and I have been talking about more recently too is test optional schools and trying to maybe not put so much pressure on the grade itself and focus on the things that really do matter, like my grades, my extracurriculars, my clubs, this and that. And so that's helpful to not be so fixated on this one thing that can determine this or that. There are plenty of schools that are test optional or don't aren't so crazy about the test grades, and that's comforting, definitely.
Yeah. Well, technically, Michigan is still test optional, but it's so selective, especially for out of state residents, that a strong test score is going to be very helpful. More in the sense that your competition is going to have it. So you kind of have to have something, right? And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would guess their average ACT is something like a 33 or 34.
You hit it on the nose.
And do you want to share what your initial ACT diagnostic score was?
My initial score, I think it was a 19. I don't even think I
Okay.
broke 20 yet.
Okay.
I think I
Yeah.
was just,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's the true statement. I believe this with all of my heart, right? I've been doing this for 20 years now. I have seen it in action. I believe every student can improve their score tremendously. Like you could go from a 19 to a 33 or 34. It's just going to take different students a different amount of time, right? And they've all got different things to work on, right? So, in addition for you to learn some grammar rules, I think there's a lot of like testing confidence that we would probably have to build, right? And that can be tricky to do, especially on your own when you would rather just avoid it than deal with this challenging, scary thing head on, right? So we can talk through like what I think it would take and how you can set up your own study plan if you want to give it. This is what I often recommend to a lot of people who are like not scoring near where they think they need to score to make it useful is let's set an experimental kind of trial period of like a really intense 3 or 4 weeks where you do all of the things and you're practicing super hard and you are really giving it your all. And then you take another practice test at the end of that period. And not to say that you should have gone from your 19 to a 34 in that 3 week period of time, but we should have seen some major gains, right? And that can either tell you if those gains aren't there, okay, I'm going to have to work this hard for a whole lot longer. Can I do that? Is it worth it to me? And that may be giving you one sort of clear answer. But if you do this sort of 3 week intensive study period and you see you went up 5 or 6 points, then you're like, oh, hey, I can do this. And it's not going to be that bad. I just got to do a couple more of these 3 week sprints, right? And it could help you have the confidence to say, yes, this is worth it. I'm going to go all in and we're going to try to get this score, right? So that's one way I would recommend doing it. But I will tell you before we talk about like, what to study and what to look at and all of these things, 16 point, 15-point increase on the ACT is usually going to take students a really long time, right? The best tutors I know can get you 6 or 7 points in maybe 3 or 4 months, right? At the same time, starting from a 19 probably means there's some fundamental test taking skills that you just aren't all that familiar with. And once you learn them, you might jump like 10 points, right? Once you kind of learn how to approach the science section and how to manage your time there, it might just open up to you and all of a sudden you're in the high 20s, right? I've seen that happen too, right? So a low score like that, it's a little hard to tell exactly how long this is going to take. So I would recommend like really giving it your all and then seeing what happens. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned you have some test anxiety. Does this happen to you like with tests for a regular class or only on sort of standardized measures?
It is really on all tests. It's not that I don't know what I'm doing, obviously. It's just that I get nervous about the time or how much time I have left, or sometimes like the information will just leave my brain immediately. And so, especially with tests at school, it does take me a little bit longer than some people that I know to just like study for one thing once for like an hour or two, take a nap, wake up, and then take the test. I have to sort of like spend the next few days like looking it over, like making sure that I am okay with what I am doing. So that's sort of why I feel, especially with this bigger test, it's important to study earlier and like take the time to really be bad at it now because I will be better at it later.
Yeah, and that's smart. You're planning ahead. Let me ask you a few more questions. When you say you have to study for like several days to feel prepared for a test, do you ever feel like when you take the test, like, oh, I studied way too much for this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's an important thing to gauge because there are some students who really do need to study for like many, many, many days, and then they're like adequately prepared for the test. But there are so many students, especially these days, actually, this is like a well researched phenomenon. They call it study addiction. And it has to do with not understanding what is good enough. Like, what are we aiming for? What level of comfort do I have to have in order to do however well you want to do on the test? How much should I study for that? And people have trouble calibrating those things, right? And sometimes it's complicated by, the teacher hasn't given you a clear idea of what's going to be on the test. So, oh my God, we got to study everything because who knows what's coming, right? Or that processing this information just it takes you a little bit more time to get everything organized. So maybe you do need to study a little bit more. The other thing that can complicate it is some sense of anxiety and self-doubt, right? It may have not come from any experience you've had in the past where like you did really poorly on a test and now you're like traumatized by it and you're like, oh, that's never going to happen to me again. But it also may just be like, I see everybody else studying their butts off. So this must be really hard. So I better study that hard too, even if it's not actually that challenging for you. Right. So it's influenced by a whole lot of things. And the clearer you can get on what those triggers are for you, the easier time you'll have finding a way to avoid them or to like control for them or even react to them if some of these things are just going to happen and you can't stop them from happening, right? Like if a teacher is not going to tell you what's on a test, you're not going to get them to tell you what's on the test. I mean, maybe you can, but if a teacher is set in their ways, they're just not going to change, right? But you can find ways to control the things that you can control and feel more confident going in. There are a lot of studies also that showing students research about test anxiety and its actual impacts on their test performance can help alleviate that test anxiety, because the research, I am like really simplifying this, the research basically shows that it has no effect. The thing that actually has an effect on your test performance is whether you know the material or not, right? Now, certainly you can get distracted, your mind can feel blank, all of these things, right? A lot of behavioral things can come up that can affect your score. But there's this book, actually I'll put it in the show notes, but here it is. It's called Overcoming Test Anxiety. It was just published by these two. One is a professor at Columbia and one is a neuropsychiatrist who works in the Boston area. I know them both. And they've put all of this information together on like, well, what do we do about this thing called test anxiety, right? And one of the very first things to know is that nobody is born good or bad at taking tests, right? There's no such thing as a good test taker or a bad test taker. What it is people have built skills based on what they've been exposed to manage the challenges that are in front of them, right? And so exposure, building familiarity with tests, right? The kind of tests that make you nervous is one of the best ways for you to overcome those feelings of worry about a test, right? But to get specific to the ACT, the more practice you do, the better you're going to feel about it. And actually, the more distance you put between you and studying for the test or you and taking the test, the larger it's going to loom in your head. It's going to feel like an even bigger deal. And it's going to be scarier and scarier because you're not actually dealing with the reality of the material, right? Like we can be like, oh my God, punctuation is so hard. But then when I tell you a semicolon only goes in two places, right? You're like, oh, that's okay. I can handle that, right? So getting into the nitty gritty and actually looking at the material can be one of the things. You just got to kind of rip the band aid off and get into it, right? And I will say that's why having a tutor, or even if they're not like an expert in the test, just someone who's like an accountability partner that could be a friend of yours at school who maybe is in a similar situation, and you just study together for an hour a week or however long it is, right? And you're like, we're going to face our fears together. We may not know what we're doing, but at least we're together, right? Little things like that can really, really help. So I'm trying to zoom out and think like strategically here. I do think the ACT is probably just going to add, at this point in your junior year, more stress than you need. And it will be a distraction from your schoolwork. And you may not get a score that is worth submitting to a place like University of Michigan, right? You may come out with a score that would be a great score to share with any number of other schools, right? That may or may not be test optional. So there's that, right? So expanding your college list is one way to kind of deal with this. And I know Brittney can help you, thinking about that. And then, of course, just saying, hey, testing is not for me. I'm only going to look at these schools, could be another way to do it. And as you've already mentioned, like really doubling down on your academics, your relationships with teachers, your leadership, your community service, your other extracurriculars can be a real way to kind of, it's not going to make up for something that may otherwise be a detriment on your profile, but it will show them your strengths, right? So I think at the end of the day, that's going to be my advice is let it go. You don't need to worry about this, right? But I mean, you're still thinking about this, and I'm sure Brittney has shared this perspective with you. So tell me more about why you're holding on to it.
I feel as if I'm holding on to it just because I feel like I truly can do it. I feel like I might not, in my mind, I know that I'm not going to have a perfect 36, and that's okay with me. It is. I mean, no one is that smart. Okay, maybe there are, but that's okay.
But I will stop you right there because this test is not about smarts. It's absolutely not about smarts.
Strategy, all the other things, I
And
suppose.
strategy, it's skill, it's practice, it's not smarts. But continue.
And so I truly do think that I can do it. I think that I have the determination. I think I have the time. I have the maybe not patience, but I definitely do have the efforts to put in the time to do it. And there's no harm in trying. I feel if I'm really not getting anywhere that I should be getting and it's just causing more harm than good, then I'll toss it to the side and I'll say sayonara to my friend the ACT. But other than that, I feel like it's good to try. It's good to attempt. And that's where I'm at.
Okay. Well, I'm going to reflect that back to you because you've been saying like you've just been putting it aside. You've not been focusing on it, but at the same time, you really want to give it a try. You're stuck in this limbo. And like I was saying earlier, I think you should really just rip the band aid off and let's set up. I can send you, a more detailed sort of schedule, but let's talk through what a 3-week sprint might look like. You try it for 3 weeks, you give it your all, you do another practice test, and then you assess from there. Are we going to continue down this road or are we saying sayonara, like you're saying? Right now, what's on deck for the next 3 weeks for you? Like, you got big exams coming up or projects due or anything like that? Would that be a good time for you to try this out?
I think it's best to start as soon as I can.
Okay.
Because, like you said, to continue putting it off is not good for me. Like, the more I push it off, the more it's like, oh, it's in the distant future. It's okay.
Yeah, yeah, but that future is coming closer every day. Yeah.
Right. And now that it's winter and it's cold, like, it's time to huddle up in a library, get a pencil,
Buckle down, hibernate with some ACT study.
right, a good cup of coffee, and start doing that.
Okay. Okay, great. So here is my recommendation, and this is for everybody, no matter where they're starting with the ACT, is to think about it in three different phases or like focuses, right? Your first phase is going to be to learn the content that you need to learn, right? And if you look on the ACT website, you can see a list of all the things that are tested. I mean, I will send you a list of like what I know you should know. There is like a math list of topics, there's, the grammar list, whatever. Science, don't worry about. You don't actually need to know the underlying science. It's for a fraction of the questions that they rely on outside knowledge. I'll come back to what you do in science in a second. But get a list together of all the topics that you need to know, right? Study them, take notes on what you didn't know, and then find ways to practice that content, right? You might not be looking at ACT type questions yet. You may just be looking at grammar worksheets that you find online or math. There are math worksheets online too, reading passages out of whatever book that you're reading in English class right now, right? Like you don't have to go and find something else to read, just like practice the skill on the things that you're already engaging in school until you feel confident with enough of the material. And this is where it might get a little tricky, enough of the material to get the kind of score increase you want to get, right? And in 3 weeks, let's be let's be optimistic, but let's say we want to get 3 points increase across the board, right? We're not going for our full 14-point increase yet, right? And that means you don't have to learn all of the math topics, right? Tell me what math you're studying right now in school.
Pre-calculus.
Okay, so you've touched on all the content that's on the ACT. But let me ask you this as well. When you did the math section, did you run out of time?
I did not finish. In fact, I looked at some of it and I think I turned the paper over, closed my eyes, and said a Hail Mary.
Oh, okay, okay. You were like overwhelmed and you were like, no, thank you. Well, if
Right.
you get up the courage to look at that ACT again, you will notice that there is some math content that you probably learned in like sixth or seventh grade. And then there's some math content that you just learned last year or maybe a couple months ago, right? Now, some people are more comfortable with that old content. Some people that's really rusty, right? They feel better about the stuff that they just learned, even though it's more advanced math, right? But as you look at those math topics, I want you to mark out, and I'm just using math as an example. You can do this in grammar as well. Mark out what you feel comfortable with and what you feel like, oh, that's rusty, or I've never learned this before, or this looks like a foreign language. Like rate them, right? So you know where to put your attention. And the mix of topics, it's not like there are 10 questions on every topic and it's like evenly split like that, right? There's going to be maybe one trigonometry question. So if trig is not your strength, don't bother reviewing it. When you see that question, you know you're going to skip it, right? On the real thing, right? So we're going to kind of prioritize how to use your brain space on this content, right? So make your list, see what you're comfortable with. That might be something you want to show me or show a tutor or someone who's really familiar with the exam so they can tell you, don't bother learning these things. Spend your time on this stuff, right? And algebra and geometry are the two kind of core subjects on the ACT. So like those are the ones you're going to want to really know. And the other things like the probability, the matrices, the trigonometry, like don't worry about them, right? There's just a couple of questions, right? And I can do the same kind of proportional distribution of brain space with, your grammar stuff and things like that as well. So that's the content phase, right? Maybe that's the whole first week. Maybe it's a week and a half. There might be a little bit more, right? Of this blitz that we're going to do where you're getting a sense of the content, you are reflecting on how comfortable you feel with it, and you're practicing, you're studying and learning, relearning the material, taking your notes and practicing it in a non-ACT format so that you can feel really comfortable with the underlying knowledge that you need to be able to succeed on the test, right? The second phase of this is where you start thinking about strategy. Okay. And that's going to be things like on the English section, don't read every line in the passage. Just read the sentence. And I like to point out, read the full sentence from capital letter to period that has anything underlined in it, right? There are going to be many sentences that you don't even need to read because there's not a single question about it, right? That's going to save you a little bit of time and help you stay focused on whatever this thing is that you need to know, right? There are whole test strategies. So that's like a specific English strategy. Whole test strategies would be things like using the process of elimination to make sure you're eliminating answers that you know won't work, or guesstimating. If there's a math question and it's like an angle and a triangle, well, it's going to be less than 180 degrees, right? Well, anything more than 180, we're not even looking at eliminate it, right? Or you might have strategies that involve, using your paper to measure something on a math question, or when to use your calculator, not to use your calculator, things like that, right? And there are tons of prep books out there that have all these strategies, and they're like the same across the different, I'm not going to mention any of them by name, but the different major publishers. The strategies are like pretty much the same. They might have a different name to them, but they're really kind of the same, right? So all of those strategies, you can get one of those books. There are plenty of websites that have really good ACT strategies as well. So you can, if you know you're struggling with a certain type of question, you can just Google strategy for triangle questions on the ACT and you will find them, right? So then you learn all of your strategies, and now you're practicing on ACT format questions, right? And the ACT website has a bunch of practice questions. They sell a book that has like 6 tests, right? That you can like practice from. If you do some Googling, and I again won't tell you where, but if you do some Googling, you will find old official tests. And the ACT hasn't changed all that much in the last like 15 years. There are a couple of little changes, but not a ton, right? So you'll find plenty of practice material for that. And then the last phase of your prep is what I call performance prep. And actually, you will have been working on it from the start of this blitz, but in the last sort of, maybe 5 or 6 days of your blitz before you do your next practice test, I want you really focused on this. And that's all the stuff around your practice. That's getting good sleep, fueling your body and your brain, moving your body, right? Not just like sitting and staring at a computer all day and then trying to take the ACT, right? It's all of these sort of like healthy habits so that you are prepared to perform at your best, right? And this is where things like managing your test anxiety would come into. And of course, like to really deal with it, it's going to take longer than 5 or 6 days. But, I could send you a copy of this book. You could read about it. And hopefully, the practice that you will have done over the previous 2.5 weeks will also help you feel more confident. You know the material you need to know. You've seen all of these questions. And once you do enough questions, you'll realize they're asking the same question with different words or different numbers, right? You will be able to recognize these types and you'll know what worked the first time you saw it, right? And so that's all the performance prep stuff. And it also includes things like making sure that you have, your pencil sharpened, that you're practicing it on paper if you're taking the paper test, right? Print it out, use a bubble sheet, like feel what that feels like to answer the question on the test and then bubble it in, right? So all of these little things can be really helpful in just helping you feel more confident that you're going to perform at your best, right? So I will write that up and send it over to you. And then you'll take a practice test and then you're going to tell me, hey, I didn't have the stamina to do this thing for 3 weeks. Or I realized 2 days in, like, this is crazy, but no, I can't do this right now. You will have an answer, a clear answer for yourself if you want to do this or if you don't. But this way, at least you will have given it a real try and you can sort of rest assured that you're not just like giving up on something before you really even, consider it. Yeah.
Right. I agree completely.
Good. Brittany, what other questions do you have or like things you want to add?
I think that's great. I love the plan for intensive prep because to your point, like you're really, I think, Sophia's a example of like we've been talking for quite a while. I would say like months actually, like about even like thinking about college prep and testing was like the preliminary concern. Like it wasn't even building a list. So it was actually like anxiety about testing first and then building a list. And I guess part of that, like, I'm curious for other folks who like might be listening too, like, how do you go as a junior, like building your list without knowing where you're at with testing yet? And then the secondary part is like also to the point of like what else can you do in your junior year to not make up, right? As we said, it's a factor. It's not everything, but what else can be done if you really can't get to that score and you do decide to throw it out the window?
Yeah, these are both really great questions. So I'll do the first one first. I usually like people to do that diagnostic process of the two practice tests and deciding sometime at the end of their sophomore year, usually like the beginning of the summer, right after sophomore year ends, so that you have a little bit more time to think about this. So usually it works out that we kind of know what we're doing around testing before we have to go into list building, right? So if you have a younger kid or if you are a younger student listening to this, just get ahead of it, right? But there are a lot of students in your situation, not just because they like drag their feet or anything like that. I have a student who really loves University of Miami, and they just announced that they are going to go back to requiring test scores, and she has been like so glad that they've been test optional. She's only test optional. She's taken all these other schools that she loves off of her list because they're requiring tests. Most of them are in the state of Florida. And so she's like, now what do I do? I know that this is the school for me, but they need a test score from me. And so she and a lot of other people are in this horrible position where they have to decide, okay, do I have to forego this school that I know, I've researched and I visited, and, all these things, I've had my heart set on it, or do I have to scramble to figure out what do I do about testing? And I do think that there will be a number of other schools announcing testing requirements in the next couple of months as they, are finalizing acceptances from this year's seniors. They're like coming to some answers about what are they going to do next year. And I am just like hoping and praying, I'm saying it everywhere I can, that they change the requirement not for this year's juniors, like those who are applying next fall, but that they change it for this year's sophomores so that people have enough time, right? So if you're listening, please, please have mercy. Okay, so back to your question though, Brittany, which was, how do you create a target score if you're still building your list? Yeah?
Yeah, essentially,
Okay.
and also, like, to your second point of your recommendation of scrapping it based on all of the things, like, if a student is in that place. We talked about what else, but really, like, you only have a few months until you're applying. So, that part.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So to quickly finish the first answer is from your initial diagnostic score, I usually add 3 to 4 points on an ACT for what you can expect after 3 or 4 months of prep, and 200 or so points on the SAT for what you can expect after good, diligent prep, right? It's not just, okay, 3 months have passed and now my score is up. You have to work for it. So that's how I say, okay, that you've taken an initial practice test, you add this sort of buffer to it. Let's assume that's your target score. Hopefully, you'll do even better than that. But that's a conservative estimate, and you can use that and compare it against the score averages at the colleges that you're thinking about to see, should I go test optional? Should I really try to test? And would this score be useful for them to see? Right. And for the people who really like to get into the data, the common data set for each college is a really great place to look, because not only can you see the average or the middle 50%, many of the schools will also tell you, a range of percentiles and what scores are at those different ranges. So you can really see how you kind of shape up next to their enrolled class from the year before. Okay, to your second question, Brittany, if you are going to go test optional and you're worried that it puts you at a disadvantage, what can you do? Right? Now, I'm going to give you real shorthand on this, but my basic framework for thinking about college fit and college competitiveness is something I call the match pyramid. It's like a little triangle pyramid, and there are 3 layers of it. The bottom layer is academics, right? Your grades, the rigor of your curriculum, the classes you chose, as far as how much they reflect certain interests of yours and preparation. Your executive functioning skills fall in there, and then your test scores fall into that bucket as well. And I'll just describe the other 2 layers of the pyramid, and then we'll come back to this academic layer. The second layer is what I call character. Colleges really care about fit and belonging. And one of the ways they can assess that is to see, are you going to fit with our culture? Do you bring something to our school that is something we're trying to grow in our student body, like a concern for this issue, or you're this kind of collaborator, whatever your personal values and your character qualities are, they're looking to bring that into their class to create some kind of culture and dynamic among the people that they're accepting, right? So that's the second kind of layer. And then the third layer is what I call the remarkable factor, which is very hard to describe, but you know what, when you see it, it's the thing that just makes you so special and so you. It's not an achievement. It's not like an award you won. It is just something that is so core to your personality and your way of being that with all of those other three things, it makes you just like, duh, we have to accept this student. They're perfect, right? So, short answer to what else can you do is work on those two top layers, right? It's not developing the remarkable factor, it's understanding what's remarkable about you, because it's already there. You just have to reflect and then think about what it is. And then working on demonstrating those character traits, like identifying them, naming them for yourself, and making sure you show up with those values at your forefront of how you behave and how you treat other people, like how you're interacting with teachers and peers in the classroom or people in the hallway, in your extracurriculars, in your community. Like, demonstrate those values that you believe in. And then on the academic side, it may be to work on it, improving your GPA, right? Like taking more challenging classes next year, right? So that they can see you're really pushing yourself, even if those grades are not in by the time you submit your early applications. They can see you're pushing yourself to take a really rigorous course load. Maybe it's something over the summer that you do that is academic related, right? It could be an extra set of courses. It could be an academic program on a college campus. It could be a project with a volunteer organization or a nonprofit, but just something that shows you have like the diligence and the executive function skills and the responsibility and the proactivity to go after this thing that you're super interested in and that you really care about, right? I know that was super, super fast. And Brittney, I know you know all of this stuff too, right? But hopefully that's really validating that like those are the things.
Always hear it from 2 perspectives at least,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think for a lot of I think I'm thinking of my other juniors too, are in a really similar places.
Yeah,
So, we are at this point, like, we're in, February at the moment, trying to figure out, like, understanding what those activities are and where there's an opportunity to, like, work on that remarkable factor because it's different for every student. It's very unique to, who the student is, what they've engaged in, and to your point, like, what other opportunities can we find at this point that are useful for your application and to yourself in understanding the career, the major that you might want to explore, but, like, finding the connectedness to your application now can be helpful, not just kind
absolutely.
of picking a random thing, but, like, making it all aligned and strategic.
Yeah, I get a lot of families who come in saying like, "Well, what should our strategy be?" And I'm like, "We won't know until about this time junior year." Like, you got to do all the things that like really call to you, that are meaningful to you, that you enjoy, that put you around people that you just love being around and you're inspired by. And then we'll look at it all as high school progresses, and then we'll say, "You know what I see here? This is the connecting thread." And you'll be like, "Oh my god, that is me." Right? You see it in hindsight. You can't say, okay, I'm going to be the data scientist who studies politics, when you're in eighth grade. You can't, no, you don't know who you are yet, right? You have to have some experience and exposure to, people and ideas. So, yeah, I think creating a really compelling narrative of, why you've done all the things you've done, what it is that motivates you, who are the people that you admire and why, what kind of person do you want to be, that can really be an amazing self awareness that comes across in your college application. And colleges love that.
And, you might not get there, like, in a month, like you said, like, same thing with the sprint for testing. It's like, we may not get there by even the summer, but as we continue to, like, meet and talk and do lots of different activities about exploring those things, like, we will get there, but you might not have the answer, like, ASAP in your college journey process here. It's gonna take quite a while to get there.
Yeah. And sometimes the writing can be the thing that brings it out.
Yes,
Yeah.
totally.
So, yeah, don't rush it, don't force it, but, keep your eyes open for it. that your inner eye, maybe your third eye, keep it open. And see what you can find. But I'm excited to see what happens with this ACT blitz. But even more important, oh, look at the face you're making. Maybe you shouldn't even do the ACT blitz. Like, let's be honest with ourselves right now. Like, why are you going to put yourself through that if you already know how you feel about it?
I'm ready. I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm excited. I think that I just need to change my perspective on the test altogether. And I think this is helping. It doesn't seem like such a bad thing after all. And it is doable, like we've been saying this whole time. And it is achievable. And it's something that I can do. So this was a good conversation to have. I needed it.
Okay, good. I'm really glad. I want you to capitalize on those feelings and that confidence. I will, you're going to have this recording, so you can listen to it again if you start like wobbling. And then, I'll send you some resources too so that you kind of know exactly what to do. And then let's check in a couple weeks and see how it goes.
Good idea. Keep me accountable.
Yeah, of course. And like any questions you have, I'm here for you.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
will.
you're welcome. You're welcome.
Thanks, Sheila.
You're so welcome, guys. I just love helping people feel more confident about their own abilities. And I am excited, truly, to see how she does on this little blitz that we've set up. If you are curious about setting up like a test period for your test prep, please reach out to me. We do those sort of diagnostic tests for free, as do many other tutoring companies. And we can take a look at those and think about what you might need to focus on in that little blitz to see the kind of results you're hoping for. And if you are in one of these situations like the student I mentioned earlier, where all of a sudden, you were very happy about going test optional, and then, one or more of your colleges decided to bring back the test requirements, please do reach out. I'm always happy to help think through strategies and what you can do here, and how to weigh, is it worth it to do the test prep, or should we change our college list, which is, I know, a hard decision to make in spring of junior year. So it takes a village. Let's help each other through this. If you have a question that you would like to submit anonymously or join me live on a recording to talk through, please see the show notes so that you can submit that information. All right, folks, we'll leave it there and we'll see you next time. Bye.